very good evening and greetings to all our listeners. Today we have with us Professor Shripad Mahulekar, a professor at IIT Bombay teaching courses on aircraft, stealth technology, rocket propulsion, and space flight mechanics. Professor Shripad has been ranked in the top 2% scientists list by Stanford University. He is an alumnus of Department of Aerospace Engineering, IIT Bombay, having been done his bachelor's here and has interests ranging from space science development, science communication, and other leadership opportunities. Dear listeners, I assure you all that today's episode will be a treasure of knowledge for all of you out there. So, without any wait, let's begin our Spacecast interview with Professor Shripad Mohlikar. How are you, sir?
Firstly, many thanks for such a nice introduction that you gave. So, I may just clarify that I mainly teach courses related to aircraft stealth technology, aerospace applications of heat transfer, and aircraft propulsion. Of course, in the basket, there are several courses, and some of the courses which you have mentioned, like for example, space flight mechanics, rocket propulsion, space propulsion. Once in a while, I do teach, but I mainly focus on aircraft stealth technology, aerospace applications of heat transfer, and aircraft propulsion.
Oh, yes. Wonderful.
And of course, as you know that IIT Bombay Department of Aerospace Engineering is basically a higher and further education institution. So apart from teaching in classroom, it is also very important to teach outside the classroom. So teaching outside the classroom, what I mean is guidance. So guidance, what I mean is research guidance. In fact, I spend a lot of time in guiding students and staff, that is PhD students, master students, and postdoctoral researchers. So this is in a brief my activities, and it is also important, if I may put it this way, to teach the world of the new results. It is very important, not just limiting teaching to the students in IIT Bombay, so to teach the world, if I may put it that way, a bit softly later. What I do is, whatever the new results, the new knowledge that is created based on the research done with the students, with the staff, I try to write papers and try to get them accepted in some of the standard, in the standard international journals. So that kind of, more or less is a comprehensive view of my academic activities at Department of Aerospace Engineering in IIT Bombay.
Okay, sir. So let's start our interview with the first question, which is, of course, going to be about rocket science. So the meaning of rocket science, even in Google, it says something very difficult to understand. So how important is it for the generation to learn and explore rocketry and aerosciences and prove that the above statement is not a fit?
So to begin with, I'm sorry, but I would like to begin with a very small contradiction. So in my opinion, there is nothing which is difficult or easy. The complexity lies only in the mind. That is what I believe. And in fact, any teacher should aim to make any subject as simple as possible. And if possible, I will say the success lies in making the central idea understandable even to a high school graduate. So if I may begin with, so I may not completely agree that aerospace engineering is difficult. Actually, in my opinion, it is just the difference between how clearly the person understands the subject. So if a person, let us say, if I don't understand aerospace engineering clearly, then I will say it is difficult. So that is the first thing. Now, the second thing is that you mentioned how important it is. So in my opinion, the importance comes with excitement. So anything which is very exciting has to be important. I hope you'll agree with this basic philosophical sentiment, right? So, you may blame me for being biased. I'm actually biased towards aerospace engineering. So I will make a statement which may sound very biased, that aerospace engineering is the #1 most exciting subject of all. So based on this, I would like to say aerospace engineering is the most interesting and the most important subject which every person, not just BTech aerospace or aeronautics, but even somebody like, for example, our other friend who is BTech in electrical, he should also consider doing a master's PhD in aerospace, because that is where the excitement, the challenge, the design technology is pushed to the limit. there is no, in my opinion, there is no other discipline in which the technology design is pushed to that limit as in aerospace engineering. So this is, I hope I have done justice to your question.
Yes, sir. So I totally agree. I think everyone present here has that bias over aerospace. I mean, that's why we all are here talking about it.
Yeah, and I like the part where you highlighted that I am a student of bachelor's in electrical engineering, and I'm still pursuing this hobby or interest of mine. And that is where my next questions comes. That if we see our education system, aerospace and space science seem like very exclusive subjects to the general public. It's hard to understand it. There is not much information out there. There are only a limited number of institutions where we can go and study it. But in the recent years, students pursuing their bachelor in civil, mechanical, computer science, or even electrical are also interested to join the forces in the growth of space sector in India or abroad. What are the different ways that you know, sir, that students can pursue to follow their passion in the field and get into the field of space science or astronomy?
I think, let us say, I don't have much idea about astronomy. I have not worked on astronomy, and though I'm not a physicist, it may, based on some of my publications, it may appear that I work on astrophysics, but that is not fully correct. I do have published 2 or 3 papers on black hole also, but that is only to understand black hole as from a thermodynamics viewpoint. Okay. So this is where I wish to inform that I have not worked on astronomy at all. Okay, so whatever so now coming back to your question, that so I would like to say that to begin with, when the whole thing started, maybe let us say several hundreds centuries ago, in fact, the disciplines never had any boundaries. Maybe that is the reason why even if you see some of the oldest universities in the world like Cambridge, they just call it Department of Engineering. They do not have a very clear, because, and there is nothing stopping a person from one particular field to do research in another field. Okay, and in fact the roots of all the disciplines, they lie in physics and mathematics, and maybe some disciplines in chemistry. Okay, so from that point of view, I would like to say that no matter in which discipline a person gets his BTech degree, he has actually always the option open to do research in whichever field he or she finds exciting. And as I mentioned earlier, the number one exciting field is aerospace. And also, as I mentioned earlier, that aerospace engineering, in my opinion, is not difficult. It is just a matter of how much clarity one gets. And the aim of research is to bring more and more clarity, to make things as clear as possible.
Yeah, so and from what I understand, no matter our background, engineering background, if we pursue our research in our interest, then we can gain the experience that we can use to get into the field of space science or other fields. And as you said, aerospace engineering is the most interesting. So we should start with that. And I believe I have my question answered completely, sir.
Okay, so for the next question, I think we should go and talk about stealth technology. So, as you have been a great researcher and tutor in the field of stealth technology, sir, we would like it if you elaborate what it is to the students who are new to it. What is stealth technology? How is it influencing our current aeronautical field?
So as of now, stealth technology is more important towards aerospace defense as of now. And I may just correct a little bit. So I don't consider myself to be a great researcher. It is just that I've spent some time working on stealth, and only one aspect of stealth, the passive, that is the infrared signatures, is where I have focus. But when it comes to teaching the full semester course, I try to cover other aspects as well, like the radar signatures, for example, visual signatures also I try to cover. So if I were, again, to come back to trying to make it simple. So again, stealth technology, if the moment somebody hears that word, a lot of questions may come and people may think it is very complex and difficult. But if I were to make it very simple, Anything that one does in stealth technology can just be summarized by 3 words, only 3 words, 3 very simple English words: camouflage, conceal, and deceive. So conceal is to hide, camouflage is to merge with the background, and deceive is to fool. So anything that we do under stealth comes under just 3 keywords. And today, as I think even from general aerospace knowledge, people must be aware that the current 5th generation of aircraft, stealth is given one of the topmost design priorities. So it is absolutely important in aerospace defense to have a proper understanding of stealth technology principles.
Indeed. Yes, sir. That's for sure.
Sir, so we read about the reports and we saw that you also had contributed to that article. We could see your name. Right now, I have a question similar to your publications and citations. Sir, you have about 97 publications and about 2000 citations. You have guided a lot of PhD students in your career. So I wanted you to reflect upon, sir, could you reflect upon the characteristics that you believe make a good PhD scholar or a good researcher? What are your suggestions? And also, I would like you to give us suggestions to our listeners on who are preparing or wish to join PhD programs in the near future. What suggestions would you like to give to them, sir?
So whatever are the suggestions which I would like to give to, let us say, the current or future PhD students are the same suggestions, which I try to practice myself. So because there is always, so practice before you preach. That is very important. So what I what I believe in following the guiding principles, that once we decide that, I would like to do research. That is quest for truth, basically, is research, in my opinion. So if you agree with that, then in that case, the main purpose should be actually to find the knowledge and to disseminate it through a proper through a formal platform, so that it benefits to the society. Whatever the knowledge is created, that should be the aim of the research. So any PhD student should join, any prospective PhD student should join to find the truth, and the truth should be found as clearly as possible. And the true test of clarity is to be able to explain to the others in writing, in the form of, let us say, articles. And the articles, one should place it for consideration to one of the standard journals and go through the review process, and be, let us say, confident about taking on the questions, the challenging questions, and eventually get them published. That should be the aim of any PhD student, any researcher. Having answered this, the only aim should not be to publish papers. And this is what I practice. That is the reason why I actually have only 81 journal papers, which is actually a very small number. Okay, because I try to write a paper only if I have something new created, and I don't try to do research for the sake of writing papers. So if a paper comes, it is fine, but if I don't have any new idea, I prefer not to write just another paper. So this is what I practice and what I preach. So
yeah, so the quest for change should be the motivating factor for all the PhD scholars. Quest for truth. The quest for truth should be the motivating factor for all PhD scholars. And sir, you also have the unusual feat and unheard feat that all of your PhD students have completed their PhD in time, or even before. You also have the record time of 3 years and 4 months, I think. What success mantra do you follow, sir, that you keep your PhD scholars such motivated and they always complete their PhD? Do you have a success mantra, or how do you keep them motivated, sir, through these long periods?
Well, it's a combination, actually. So in fact, when it comes to PhD, what I believe is, this is purely my personal belief, that up to the first 6 months or 1 year, If at all there are any incompatibilities, like let us say the student does not like that particular topic, so up to 1 year, I believe that it is let us say when a PhD student joins, that a student should be given an option that he can change the topic, change the guide up to 1 year. But the moment 1 year is crossed, then I think what happens, it is very difficult to, later on, what if at all there is a failure, if at all, then it is very difficult to blame the student singularly. That is my personal opinion, because beyond one, like 2 years, 3 years, and not coming up with anything, is actually can be a problem to the student in the future. So from that point of view, after 1 year, I think the responsibility should be taken both by the student and the guide in trying to make sure that the student is on the right track. So I believe it is the responsibility of the guide. It is the responsibility of the guide that the student is on the right track. That means he or she has a well-defined problem, and the student should take the responsibility. Once put on the right track, the student should keep working on the right track. So it works both ways, and the guide, of course, has to always give the try to boost the morale, increase the confidence of the student, so that the student feels motivated to keep working on the right track. This is what I believe. Let me know.
Yeah, I completely understand now, sir.
So next question I have is a very generic question that we would like to know from you. Since now the space tourism is booming everywhere in US, is seeing that people are ready to spend millions and go to space for even 10 minutes, if that's what happiness feels like for them. So what are the current steps taken, or what do you think the current steps should be taken in aerospace sector to make space travel or even aerial travel more greener and more compatible to the atmosphere?
So from point of view of greenery, I think what I would like to say, it is more a problem of emissions, in fact. So, and the emissions mainly come from the engine. So if let us say we take care of the combustion part, I don't actually do research in combustion. So the emissions from an engine are mainly based on the combustion products. So that is actually what deals with the making, let us say, the atmosphere more green from point of view of, let us say, oxides of nitrogen, or for that matter even increasing the levels of carbon dioxide. But that, of course, we know that particularly I think that is more to deal with the environmental aspect part of it. So since I don't I don't do much of research or reading on that, so maybe if it is okay, that question I will take a little bit different turn, and then maybe move on to the other question which you asked is regarding space versus air travel. Okay.
Yeah.
So space actually, well, of course, if there have been several space missions. In fact, people have gone on the moon also. In fact, but of course, that was, I think, the last mission on the moon was sometime in 1973, roughly. So I don't know, around that, yeah. Thereafter, there has not been any mission to the moon, but there have been several, missions to the space. Many of them have been successful. So that, I believe, is mainly from point of view of the humans' desire to learn more about, in addition to what is there on our planet. But now let us come back to our planet. So of course, on our planet, everybody knows that ever since the Wright brothers invented the aeroplane sometime in 1905 or 1907, around that, right? So ever since the Wright brothers made one of the first heavier than air flying machine. Okay, so in fact that has been actually one of the revolutions. So in fact, after the let us say aeronautics revolution, I think the next revolution, in my opinion, has been the IT revolution. That is in 1990s. But before the IT revolution, one of the most important revolutions in the human history is the aeronautics, because it made travel from one continent to another continent so convenient. Earlier to that, people used to travel by ships several months. Okay. So now there has been always a desire that air travel should be as fast as possible, but at the same time as safe as possible. So there is likely to be a little bit of issue when we have this combination fast and safe, because the moment we try to increase the speed, then there is a possibility that we have to even more carefully address safety. So speed is definitely important. In fact, there is a need to travel as fast as possible. There is a need to travel even higher. Currently, most of the commercial aircraft which cruise at Mach number 0.8, I think their cruise altitude is roughly 11 kilometers. But if, let us say, if the cruise altitude instead of 11 kilometers were to be 40, 45 or 50 kilometers, let us say, okay, then it is possible to make the rotation of the Earth to advantage. Because the logic is very simple. So let us say you have a helicopter which is just hovering above the ground. Okay, in 12 hours you don't reach the other side of the globe, isn't it? Because you are still within the atmospheric boundary layer. So you need to you have to go to the slower layers of the atmospheric boundary layer, something like 40, 45, 50 kilometers to make advantage of the rotation of the Earth, to reduce the travel time basically. So for a given speed, you reduce the travel time by flying at something like 50 kilometers. And in addition to that, if you have the ability to fly at hypersonic speeds, then it is possible to have the reality come true that one may be able to travel from one continent to another continent 180 degrees apart in a matter of just a few hours. So that is where actually the future is likely to be of aeronautics.
That was wonderful, sir. And I was going to add on to it, like as you were saying, the new vehicles, upcoming vehicles. Would you like to talk about the reusable hypersonic vehicle that has yet to come a commercially common and a viable mode of aerial transportation? How long will that take for technology to catch up? When is it tentative that we can have something like that to use in common hands?
So, with your permission, I would like to skip how long, because it is very difficult to predict, like Nostradamus. Okay, so the thing is, for example, in the 1990s, I think you might have, seen the movie Terminator 1, Terminator 2. I don't know whether you have seen that movie. Okay, and when the movies came, people were saying, artificial intelligence will see something like Terminator within a few, maybe 1 or 2 decades, but I don't know whether that has happened. I'm not into AI, so I don't know much about that. But what I'm trying to say is that definitely it is very difficult for me or perhaps anyone to say how long. But what I would like to say is that from the concept of reusable is actually what is the future direction. Reusable at high speeds. So reusable basically, now for example, everybody knows that let us say somebody would like if let us say a country would like to put a satellite in orbit. So current technology is, everybody knows, it's a multi-stage rocket. So multi-stage rocket, what happens is that the payload fraction, the weight of the payload divided by the total weight of the launch vehicle, is actually very small. And that if the payload fraction is small, then in that case it increases the cost of the mission. The cost of putting, let us say, 1 kilogram in orbit, the cost goes up. Okay, the same thing if let us say the payload fraction were to increase, and that increasing of the payload fraction is possible only if the launch vehicle is made close to 100% reusable. So efforts are going on to make the launch vehicle close to 100% reusable. Maybe 100% may take some time, because to arrive at engine or combination of engines to take from atmosphere to space, that combination of engines, developing such engines is likely to take time. So that is why with your permission, I would like to skip that question, how long. Okay, so in fact, so that was the reason why I said it is very difficult to say. The main problem is how to arrive at an engine which or a combination of engines which will work from sea level to space.
Correct.
Okay, this is where the challenge lies. Okay, I don't know how long it will take to overcome this challenge. Okay, so that is the reason why instead of exactly 100%, maybe slightly less than 100%. So we have the 100% is called SSTO, single stage to orbit.
Stage two.
And the close to 100% is TSTO, twin stage to orbit. So which means you have a rocket initially, which will take the let us say the launch vehicle, let us say the vehicle to a certain height and a certain speed, most important, and then maybe the air breathing scramjet engine can take over and get sufficient momentum, and then it can be taken out of the atmosphere. So to answer your question, single stage to orbit is is actually almost 100% reusable, and a twin stage to orbit aims close to 100%, but it won't be 100%. But it is somewhere in between SSTO, single stage to orbit, and a multi-stage rocket. And the other aspect of reusable is what is the this other challenge. It's of course a very big challenge because along with the hypersonic speed, Mach number 5 and above, comes with the challenge of skin friction, aerodynamic heating. It becomes very important. And beyond about Mach 4, the skin friction heating can become aerodynamic heating, can become as important or even more important than aerodynamic drag reduction. And then in that case, we need to give priority to to manage the aerodynamic heating. And then it is necessary to address aerodynamic heating also in the configuration, because normally the supersonic aircraft, let us say F-16, for example, their main objective is to reduce the aerodynamic drag. So aero heating is not much of an issue for Mach number 1.5. Of course, nowadays stealth aircraft, there are some other considerations. If it becomes hot, it can be seen because of infrared signature. So we won't discuss that stealth now. We will discuss hypersonics now. So now when it comes to, let us say, Mach number 5 and above, then the configuration has to be designed also to manage the aerodynamic heating. So it is always possible that there is a compromise, that the aerodynamic drag need not be the least.
Okay, so we have already reached our atmospheres right now, sir, and we already have an aircraft. So I'll just go out into space and I'll ask you about a question about black holes. So could you reflect and explain to us about the dissipative nature of black hole, and could you explain a bit more about your research on it?
So, okay, this firstly, as I clarified right in the beginning, I'm not a physicist, nor am I'm an astrophysicist. But the point is that in fact, I'm interested in learning thermodynamics myself, because thermodynamics is one of the most fascinating subjects, in my opinion. And we have, in fact, both of you must have studied the concept of entropy in your yeah. So. And entropy as a concept has been to be very fascinating, and my research aims at trying to understand and explain entropy as clearly as possible. That is, disorder, entropy, let us say, as a measure of disorder, to put it in a very simple way. And everybody knows that the second law says that the disorder is going to increase with time. That is a very well-known law of physics. Then the very basic question comes that if the disorder always is going to increase, then who are we and why are we? Because we appear to be so ordered. Simple, isn't it? So that actually is the motivation behind my research in thermodynamics of dissipative structures, dissipative to generate disorder. So dissipative structures, they actually generate disorder. Black hole is also a dissipative structure. It appears to be perfectly ordered, one of the highest in terms of density, highest in terms of packing. Okay, there is in fact a concept that packing limit. I would not like to go into too many details right now. Okay, so the black hole is basically a thermodynamic dissipative structure to justify its existence, just like a human being. Okay, just like any animal, just like a plant, what it does is it takes in mass energy at lower entropy and gives it out at a higher entropy. So that is why a black hole is a dissipative structure. We human beings are also dissipative structures, and we need to do that always to justify our existence and to comply with the second law. So that is actually briefly, in a very simple way, trying to explain what is a dissipative structure. And we all, including the solar system, including the black hole, we are all dissipative structures. We appear to be perfectly ordered, but we are existing only because we are dissipative structures. We create disorder in our surroundings to justify our existence. So this is an understanding of us, of black holes, from a thermodynamic perspective, and that is where actually I limit my understanding of black holes. I don't go into the astrophysics part of it.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that, sir. I have a bit more insight on black holes, even though they are heavily elusive to me. But yeah, I did get some information on black holes and their dissipative nature. I look into that a bit more.
You're most welcome, and even if you have questions later, we can discuss.
Yes,
Sure.
sir. I do have one question which we can talk about, which includes about the negatropy. Negatropy. There was negatron theorem that you had mentioned in your the research paper. I was going through it. It was too informative, and I was not well knowledged, so I couldn't understand the whole gist of it. But then you related area and entropy. How it's not directly entropy is related, but it has a relation with negative entropy as well.
So actually, the idea of negentropy was proposed quite long time back by Erwin Schrödinger, sometime in the 1940s. So he said that all these dissipative structures. Of course, the concept of dissipative structure was coined by Ilya Prigogine. Okay. So Ilya Prigogine actually got the Nobel Prize in thermodynamics sometime in 1978, and one of the main reason why he got a Nobel Prize in is for trying to explain these dissipative structures. So Schrödinger coined this concept of negentropy, and he said that all living organisms have a negentropy. And my research, what I tried to do is his understanding of negentropy. I tried to put it in very simple mathematical terms and tried to correlate with the well-known concept of entropy. So negentropy is not just entropy with a negative sign, but actually it tries to compare the entropy, let us say, of a dissipative structure with the entropy of its immediate surroundings. So it is a contrast. So what we try to do is we try to contrast the entropy of a dissipative structure relative to its immediate surroundings. So that is where we get the negative sign, because the contrast is a negative contrast.
Okay. So it tends to create less disorder.
So locally,
Okay.
we all try to reduce the disorder, and that is what we say, increasing our order. We try to do that, but it is always at the cost of increasing the disorder in the immediate surroundings. That is how all the dissipative structures operate. So whether it is black hole, we all do the same thing actually in principle, and we have to do the same thing to justify our existence.
Okay, this is a different topic, sir, but I wanted to touch upon it because we all are from different colleges, and people in my club and other students also come from different colleges. And I have heard of a lot of opinions about IITs and institutions and private colleges in difference. And we have seen, sir, that IITs, NITs, and other eminent colleges such as IISc are the frontiers of research in India. But in the recent decades, some private colleges have had shown great rapport and jumped ranks to compete with these institutions. So there are a lot of budding private colleges that are doing great research in India. But still, I have seen among students and our club members that there is a prevailing concern among students of Tier 2, Tier 3 city colleges that they lack the infrastructure and the exposure that someone from an IIT or a good private college gets. So do you have anything to say to those students I mean, I understand that they should not discourage themselves just because of lack of infrastructure or something. But what do you propose, sir, that these students should do to do better and earn better opportunities in the field?
So, of course, I may not be able to comment much on, let us say, the different IITs, different institutes and private institutions in India. In fact, that I'm actually, I will put it this way: I have not done a survey myself, to be able to give a really in-depth answer. But regarding the other question, I may be able to answer regarding the infrastructure. So what I personally believe, and this might actually help in motivating no matter where the student is pursuing research, is I always believe that for research, what we need is a pen, paper, maybe a desktop PC or a laptop PC and a mind. If we have this, we should, and of course these days internet, so that we get access to, Scopus, Web of Science, let us say, so that we can get the journal papers from, if we have this, a person, a PhD student should be able to start the research. Anything beyond that is bonus. So if experimental supercomputers, if they are available, fine, make use of them. If they are not available, I believe, and that is what I practice. As I mentioned, I always preach only after practicing. So I always practice, if I have these facilities with me, pen, paper, my own mind, and a desktop PC I'm in front of, then I start my research. And
Okay,
most of my research is theoretical and low and numerical. Low and numerical means the kind of numerical work which I do, even a desktop PC which is available today is enough. And you will agree that the desktop PC today is almost what a supercomputer was 20 years back.
Yeah, our phones are more powerful than the computers on Apollo mission that went to the moon, right? I also, that's an interesting thing to put up. And I think so. What I think you concluded with was that a student should have a go for attitude. If they have a good attitude towards research, they'll be able to do it. And I think IITs and IISCs also have internship and apprentice programs that they can join to get more use of infrastructure that is available in India. Thank you. I think you answered my question perfectly, sir. Thank you. Yeah, we would like to end on a positive notes, and so I had this is the last question, sir, and I think you can take as much time as you want. So you have a lot of experience in research, and you have given a lot of your years to science. What I wanted to know is, do you have any interesting story or anecdote that you wanted to share with us about your experience in the field, or maybe you met an eminent person of India and you had a great experience with them? Do you want to share something with our community members here, a story that you would like to share?
So I would like to keep this very simple, because, first, my personal philosophy, let us say, I cannot put it completely. To me, every person is important, so I would not like to, every person, every student, every colleague is as important as the other, regardless of whatever be the hierarchy in the society, hierarchy in the organization. So therefore, I may not be able to answer this question from point of view of meeting one particular person having a very high rank in a particular organization, or let us say, so from that point of view, I may not be able to answer. But I would like to say that one should look, rather than at one event, one person interaction, one should look at the journey. It is the journey which decides the destiny, and not one event many times. And how a person performs the journey over a period of time is what actually is more important. So actually, I take pleasure in the journey rather than looking forward to just one particular person or a few people or maybe few events. So this is how I would like to look at. This is my perspective. Let me know.
Thank you, sir. Believe in the journey. Exactly. Perfect. This is, I think, the perfect answer. Believing in the journey.